Well, hi there, students. It's Mr. V. Today we're going to take pretty much what you've learned in all of the screencasts you've learned so far and try to condense it into one quick demonstration. Well, I can tell you what a value drawing is not, and that is this right over here. This is a contour line drawing of a flower. And remember, contour lines are lines in their purest sense. If I were to write my name, that would be a contour line. We want a value drawing, and a value drawing characteristically does not have any contour lines in it if you want it to be a pure value drawing. But what I'm going to show you today is I'm going to take this drawing and I'm going to speed it up and pause it in some parts and highlight some things. I'm going to condense all of what you've learned in those other screencasts into one concise demo. And we're going to make these lines go away. And just to give you guys a little terminology refresher, a value drawing uses implied line. An implied line is a line that's simply defined by its surrounding values, lights and darks. To create an implied line, simply put a dark thing next to a light thing. If you have a line on your paper, typically you want to turn that into a dark thing to make it disappear. Alright, well, let's get started. I started this drawing using simply pre-drawing. I stacked several ovals on top of each other just like this. And then I used my pencil and I drew the petals after that. I didn't look at anything, but if you've looked at several flowers, you can build a flower. That's why pre-drawing is so important, and that's why I focus on it on every single lesson. So I started with contour lines, and your first step is to pick your light source. Our light source here is in the left side, so that means any one of these petals that gets hit, that's going to help us know where the light's going to be and where the dark is going to be. So let's look at this petal right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to shade this petal on the inside, and also I'm going to do a second thing at the same time. I want to get rid of this line right here, and the way I'm going to do that is to put a dark thing right smack next to that line. And naturally, since our light source is coming from the left, that's going to work perfectly for as I shade. Okay, so let's get started. I'm shading with a technique called hatching. That's simply parallel lines that are side by side. And I'm going to eventually turn this into cross hatching as I go. And so I'm drawing with what I call a pressure 1. I'm barely caressing the paper with the lead. I'm trying to go as light as I possibly can. Why? Well, it's a lot easier to add value than it is to take away value. So if you plan very lightly first by drawing your lightest values, then if you make a mistake, it's easier to erase. And you also have more control over your values if you add value as you go. And notice I start in where my darkest area is going to be, right here. Now the contour line is still visible, but as you can see, as I hit it with more layers, I believe we're starting on layer number 3 right here already, it starts to disappear, and I just build up and build up and build up lead as I go. I'm changing to cross-hatching. Cross-hatching and layering go great together because your strokes overlap each other and fill in the gaps between. And if you simply increase your pressure as you add layers of value, it'll start to smooth out your values into a nice sandy texture. I love it. Now what did I do right here? What I did is I drew with my shadows. I wanted to make a more natural looking flower. And nature has defined shapes, as we know, but it's also organized chaos. Real flowers have chips and grooves and folds and veins and nicks in them. And so all you got to do is you can cut into your drawing by simply adding an extra shadow in there. And I just did a little triangular wedge type shape. So I've shaded that petal and I'm moving on to the next one. I'm simply going to continue the next step. Lay down value lightly first and then layer over the top as you go. Let's speed it up a little bit. In areas that are eventually going to become black, I still paint them lightly gray. And notice I said the word paint, and we're using a pencil. Well, with a value drawing, treat it like a painting. You're covering up your paper, just like you cover a canvas. If you have a painting and your canvas is exposed, it's not completed and it looks bad. Likewise with a value drawing, the only areas that you're going to have that are white paper should be your highlights, and those only account for a minimum of between 5 to a maximum of maybe 10% of your values. And so I'm just layering over the top. I'm trying to paint over the paper using my lead. And think of it like that. You're painting. You're not simply adding value to the area where there's no light. Though that is a big part of it, you're painting over the top of things. So what I want you to see is that I didn't simply color in every petal gray. I left a nice little light area in between two dark petals. Let's go back to our very first petal that we look at here. Notice there's a light area where there's the highlight, but we can still see the contour line on the outside of that. That'll eventually go away when we shade our background. But as you can see, it gradually fades into a dark shadow where those little notches are that I drew. And then there's a tiny little sliver of light area right there that separates the dark that separates one petal from the one in front of it, and then it turns into light gray and then gets darker as it goes down. That's what we call implied line. It goes light to dark, light to dark, light to dark. You simply have a light thing in between two forms. That's good craftsmanship is what that is. Craftsmanship, once again, going back to our screencast, is having an intense focus on what you're doing, using thought, going back to what you've learned and incorporating that in, thinking actively and in real time as you work, not simply zoning out as you work, but having an actual thought of what you're doing and having an intense concern and care for your project and trying to make something that is of high value and high quality. That is craftsmanship, and any artist of any skill level can achieve that regardless of their skill level. All it takes is conscious thought and understanding of the technique and a practical awareness of what you're doing in the moment. Now, what's that all mean? That just means you're focused and you're on task and your mind's working really hard while you're working. You're thinking as you work. Okay, so what I'm going to show you right here is what's called the detail stage. Once again, I'm not going to complete this flower all the way, but at the very end of your drawing, you add the details. And what I'm doing is I'm simply adding small little hatch strokes in the light areas to make it visible. I'm cutting little grooves into the flower, and I'm using hatching to make detail. Most petals have little folds and ridges and ripples in them, and that's what I'm doing right now. And notice I'm working from the dark into the light as I do this. What shading techniques do you use for this? Well, it's pretty basic. I'm using hatching because that's the direction that the petal is going. That's the direction that my strokes are going to make the ridges. And I'm simply cutting into the petal. I'm going to go in and I'm going to pull these little ridges out of the shadow and into this first petal that I drew, into the light areas. Always work from the dark into the light when you're doing your detail. Naturally, if you want your details to be visible, you need to use a pressure that is higher and more intense than what you used to create the shadow. So if you are drawing a detail in a area where you shaded at a pressure 2, you need to do it darker than a pressure 2, probably a 2.5 or maybe a pressure 3. Okay, at this stage, I want to get rid of this contour line. I don't want it. So what do? I need to make a value next to it that's at least as dark as the line that I'm drawing. And so what I'm doing right now is I'm protecting my drawing by giving it a good barrier or contour line first, and then I'm adding my values next to it. Why am I doing that? Well, that's just so I don't have any of my shading strokes cut into the beautiful light part of my drawing here. I don't want that. So I kind of traced a dark line on the outside of the petal to protect it. So it gave me a nice little 1 mm buffer there. And I'm just shading solid black in here. And look what happens to the light petal when we put a dark thing behind it. It brings out more of the values inside the petal too. I'm just going to rotate a little bit. And this is one of my favorite parts. This you would probably do during the wrap-up stage of your drawing, you know, when you're looking to see what you can improve. And just look right there where the pencil's at. Putting a dark thing next to it just brings out that beautiful light highlight. And it also is a great way to cover up mistakes. If you draw with your values like this and you have a big ugly mistake that you can't erase, man, just draw a dark, just have that background cut into it a little bit. And you can see I'm going over some of my areas and I'm trimming and I'm refining my edge of my flower petals by doing this. Um, it's a lot of fun. It's one of my favorite stages. And you can clean your drawing up simply by shading into your pre-drawing. It can make itself disappear eventually. So what I'm doing is I'm adding another layer into it that's very, very light. There's so many different types of gray, and by simply adding new layers of value in certain spots, you can make it look realistic. You don't have to cover the whole petal in these values, but I'm shading the direction of my form. It's drooped flat, going left to right. So my hatch strokes are going the direction that that part of the petal is going. I'm simply just increasing my values. I didn't like this white highlight here that was separating the both petals, so I made it a little darker into a gray, cast shadow from the other petal. And so I'm just adding a cast shadow from that petal on top of this one right here to make it more realistic. Always think, do any parts of your form cast a shadow on other parts? So I'm going to speed the drawing up a little bit. I'm just going in, I'm punching up the values, I'm adding detail here and there. And thanks for watching. And I hope you can learn from this. Go over and watch it again, just to see if there's anything that you can pull out of it. And you might not get everything at once. Yeah, that's okay. But over time, the stuff's going to start to stick, and you can become a very good artist eventually by constantly striving for good craftsmanship and quality in your work. And I look forward to seeing you in class. Take care.